to be able to create something and put it out in the world that other people did when I was growing up that meant so much to me, that helped me do something as intimate and growth oriented as getting in touch with feelings that I was otherwise suppressing, that I can now do that for other people is, it's incredibly fulfilling. I'm so grateful. So I'm grateful that I leaned in. There are certain aspects of my personality that don't do that, and I'm not entirely sure why I made that choice with music, given how hard of a path it can be. But I'm really grateful that I did.
That's awesome.
You're listening to the Freio Music Podcast. To the Freio Music Podcast.
My name is Rain, and I produce and perform under the name Phutureprimitive. I live here in the Bay Area. Let me see. My first album came out in 2004, and I've been doing it full time since 2010. And music is such powerful medicine. I'm super grateful to be doing what I do for a living.
Oh, that's beautiful. And is that your studio? It looks like you could be in a theater. It looks awesome.
Yeah, it's actually a garage that's been converted into a music studio. It was like when I landed here, I was like, okay, I got to do something because the garage look is definitely not working. So I decided to make it look kind of like almost like an old timer cigar smoking lounge or something.
There you go. Nice.
Yeah, it's fun. It feels good. I really like having a space that I feel good in. Because I really believe that the environment that you're in helps to shape how you feel and therefore the kind of music that you produce.
Absolutely. So I wanted to zoom out and kind of be like retrospective at first and think about your early days, maybe as a child, and what got you interested in music to start out.
Before I can even remember, I apparently used to sit at the piano and just plink on the keys. I guess would be my first maybe introduction to exploring melody. And just at an early age, I realized how much I really enjoyed listening to music. I didn't know anything about genres. I just knew that there was music that made me feel good, or it made me feel anything. And I can look back now and see how, over time, with hindsight, I can see that I was definitely repressing some of my emotions just due to some issues that I had during upbringing, and music was a way for me to actually feel things that I don't think I was otherwise permitting myself to. I didn't have any language for this or even know I was doing it at the time, but in hindsight, I can look back and see how it was an access point to get in touch with certain parts of me that I was otherwise, I think, suppressing or just avoiding due to discomfort or pain or fear.
Yeah. And did your parents or did you have siblings that introduced you to music? Or did you just discover it on your own?
I am an older brother. I have a sister. And so my parents, let me see, my parents had a record collection. And so I got to inherit their record player over time and their music collection. And so I just started by, I think, going through their records and, and listening to things like, classic stuff from the 70s. Like the Eagles and Jean-Michel Jarre, who's actually a real early ambient music pioneer. I got to listen to some of that stuff. And that was really sort of my introduction to music, sort of by the way that I got to explore music of my own volition was being exposed to that set of records that was mostly from the 70s.
Yeah. And did you gravitate towards the lyrics or the beats or what was it that maybe stuck out about the songs that you did enjoy?
Yeah. It at first, what stuck out to me is that it helped me feel, and I liked how I felt when I was listening to music. And it wasn't until I don't know how old I was exactly, but once I started really getting of an age where I could buy my own music on a regular basis, I noticed that most of what really moved me was not always, but often electronic in nature. Like, went through a phase where I was really into industrial music, which is largely produced, electronically. And, then as house music started becoming a thing in the really early 90s, and just sort of techno at large. There's something about electronic music that has always really pulled me in. It has a gravity. It's just there's something about it that I really like. I think it's partly because you can make sounds and do things with a computer at least a lot more easily than you can with an actual organic instrument that you hold in your hands, and in a way that you can make sounds and orchestrate things in a way that you've never heard before. And I think I like the variety that you get with producing music and just listening to music of an electronic nature. I'd say that was probably the first thing that I really noticed that pulled me in about music.
And then once you got pulled in and started to kind of explore maybe different styles of music, how did you approach that? Did you take any courses in school? I don't know what age that is, but how did you take it to get your feet in the water?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's see. I took a guitar lesson. I'm guessing I was like maybe 7 or 8. I took guitar lessons for a very short time, but I was impatient with it. And I just told my parents I wasn't that interested, and they just let me stop. In hindsight, it would have been cool if they had me stick with it a little bit longer. I took a term of piano and a term of music theory. But after that, I was still trying to figure out what the hell I wanted to do. And after taking those couple music courses, I was like, well, at that time, the conclusion that I came to, it's not necessarily true anymore. But at that time, I thought to myself, the only thing this is really going to guarantee me is a job like teaching others how to make music. And at the time, that wasn't really in my highest excitement. So I turned my attention elsewhere. And long story short, I was just out of high school, I was in a car accident. And I took the money from that accident that I got to replace the car, and I bought my first sampler instead, simply because I was just getting into electronic music and I had heard a little bit about samplers. And there was a trance artist at the time and I got to see his list of what he uses in the studio. So I bought one of what he had, and it turned out that it was actually a really good synth. And I started with hardware synthesizers. For many years, it was just a hobby. And I started DJing in the early 90s. And after I got good enough at making basic loops that I really liked on this synth or this sampler, I would use them as transition points between two songs. And I just kept working on it and developing it. And over time, those loops started to become more evolved and slowly become actual songs in and of themselves. There's more to the story between then and where I'm at now. But that was sort of my introduction to getting started as a producer.
Yeah, well, that's great. And that synthesizer, was that analog?
Yeah, it was I believe, analog. I mean, it was in Sonic EPS 16 Plus, and then my next keyboard was a Kurzweil K2000. And man, it's they're at their time they were both really they were great synth and samplers, but they had these tiny little LED screens that, and you so like you spent a lot of time peering into this tiny screen, trying to like orchestrate your sounds and create a basic arrangement, and just everything was an access point for there that you wanted to do. Besides the actual manipulation of the sound, which had knobs and sliders for it, but I mean, there was no YouTube at this time, so it was you learn just by trial and error.
Yeah, and how were you saving those tracks? Was this I don't know exactly how old or when you were born, but is this cassettes? Is this I don't know, before then, CDs?
I think it was some kind of discs. It might have, like around that time, I think it might have been zip drives. So you'd get it on a zip drive, and then you go from your zip drive to your computer, and then from your computer, like burn it onto a CD. It depended on how you were going to be playing. Oh, I think I had a DAT player back then, so I would get it onto my computer and then somehow get it onto a DAT. Once I started doing CDJs as a DJ, it became easier because then I could just burn the song onto a CD and mix it in.
Nice.
The technology has changed so much from back then.
Oh yeah.
It is so easy anymore to make music. It's one thing it's why I'm making an effort anymore to teach people how to produce EDM, because it's been just, it's an amazing part of my life, and anybody that's interested, I want to get them to understand how easy it is and do anything I can to help them have the same opportunity.
Well, that's great, and that's a good like foreshadowing, because I definitely want to jump into that course and what you're doing in recent days. But once you kind of decided to start DJing and playing tracks, and then having those transitions organic or unique, how did you get any traction? How are you kind of finding your way through the industry?
Yeah, it was when I started DJing, it was really mostly just I grew up in Eugene, Oregon, and it was mostly, at the time, I had a group of 3 other friends, and together we made a sound system, which is essentially like a cohort of DJs, and we would throw parties together at the main music venue there at the time, and which was mostly a reason for us to be able to play out and get to see our friends and do this thing called raving at the time. And I did that for many years. I was so passionate about music. It was interesting. I had this belief at the time that if I ended up doing it professionally, that it would somehow taint the experience, and it would somehow minimize one of the things that I enjoyed most in life. So I actually made an effort to not pursue it.
Wow.
That I look back now at that thinking, and it's pretty funny. I was taking it myself and it pretty seriously back then. But right around the time that I started taking a break from pursuing DJing very frequently, and my friends and I stopped doing events together as much, right around that time, I had just made enough noise for myself that people started reaching out to me and book me. I had just sort of passed that threshold. So it's ironic that it was right when I stopped making the effort that other people started reaching out. So it kept me in the game, and it kept me performing. And then I was working in the tech industry, and I was still really passionate about making music. And it was a challenge between wanting to make music with a computer. By this time I was making music with a computer. And before getting home in the afternoon or the evening, I was sitting in a cube with a job that I really didn't like, staring at a computer screen for 9 hours. And by the time I'd get home, staring at another computer screen for hours, trying to be creative. It's certainly doable. I mean, it's if that was the level of my problems back then, they're pretty good problems to have. But as fate would have it, they laid off 500 people at this company that I worked with and outsourced all their jobs. And they gave me the opportunity to stick around because I had been with them long enough, or get a severance package in unemployment. And long story short, I realized, well, wait a minute. I've been wanting an opportunity to just make music for a while without the hindrance of doing something beforehand that I really don't like. And so I decided it was an artistic grant is what they were offering me, rather than a severance package and unemployment. And yeah, I got unemployment for a year and a half, and that was when I made my first album that then came out in 2004.
That's amazing. That's an awesome
Yeah.
story. So just, I went to school in Eugene, so I'm just curious, what were
You
those
did?
early theaters that you were playing at? Was that Wow Hall or was that?
Yeah, the vast majority of the time it was at Wow Hall.
Yeah, yeah.
I've played at the McDonald Theater before as well, but the Wow Hall was the vast majority of it was the location for the most of the events that we did.
Yeah.
I've had countless fun times with my friends in that place.
Oh, totally. Same here.
Yeah.
And amazing how much talent comes through there, and some of the
Mhm.
artists that are just, on a rocket ship trajectory come through, and then suddenly there's no
Yeah.
way you're going to see them in that, intimate of a venue ever again. So it was really
Yeah.
cool place. So I love that you discuss the mindset of that self-limiting belief initially of
Mhm.
not wanting to succeed because it would take away the fun, and I appreciate that you bring that up, and I think it's so important for people to be aware of their own thoughts and those like kind of glass ceilings that they set for themselves.
Yeah.
And then again, you could see this as like, oh my God, I'm being laid off from this job, and you decided to switch it and say, no, this is happening for me, not to me.
Mhm.
This is an art grant, and now I get to make the most of it, and that's
Yeah.
amazing. And that album, that was subconscious. Is that right?
Yeah, subconscious. And just to dig into what you were speaking more,
Please.
that wasn't an immediate way that I framed it initially. I was just like, God, what am I going to do? I just lost my job security, and I was initially thinking I was going to actually take the job going back to work for them again, because I didn't want to give up the security of a job, until through talking with my friend and family, I was like, well, wait a minute, this is a huge corporation. This is the secure job, and I just lost it. So how secure is it really? And then I started thinking about the benefits of the artistic grant. So it wasn't immediate. It took some time to come to that perspective.
Yeah. Well, it
Yeah.
definitely paid off.
Yeah.
And so, what were you doing in the tech industry? Were you a programmer or?
No, I was primarily doing tech support.
Okay.
I worked for Symantec for a number of years, and then for Web Trends doing web analytics.
Okay. So
Yeah.
you were very analytical, and you had the training on the computer, which seems like it might have given you some sort of mental advantage when it comes to working in a digital system. Did
Yeah,
you see that?
that's a really great observation. It never occurred to me, because I'm not a digital native. I didn't grow up with a computer. So yeah, I suppose that me working in that industry for that long got me comfortable enough with computers that by the time the idea came around of being able to make music with a computer, it was a fairly easy onboarding process. So it's, I suppose, a hidden benefit of having spent many years doing something that I didn't like doing at all. So thanks for pointing that out.
Yeah, no worries. It struck me.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure exactly what you're doing, so I wanted to dive in a little bit.
Yeah.
But now let's talk about subconscious, and how that seemingly was a breakthrough for you. And I don't know if you feel the same way. And what tools were you using at that time?
Yeah, I mean, God, that that album was produced on Windows 98, believe it or not. And I lived with my really good friend at the time, Jeremy, and he had a Mac that was powerful enough to run. I think we were using. The first DAW that I really started using was Cakewalk. But then he had Logic on this Mac, and so I was just learning how to use that as a piece of software to make music with, right about the time that I got to doing music full time. And it was the vast majority of that album is all coming from between the two of us. We had amassed a really solid collection of synthesizers and samplers at the time, so a lot of what you hear in that is actually coming from MIDI and then through cables from these synths plugged into a sound card with lots of inputs and then being recorded into the computer. I mean, anymore, I do almost everything in the box, just all in the computer. There was when I think back to that time, there was a magic about just trying to figure out how to get all these things to communicate with each other and hope that when you hit record that it does what it did last time. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And just all the trial and error that you go through to get it to happen. By the time you finish a song, it was like, God, this is an achievement, because there was a lot of problem solving just to make this happen. And yeah, that album in particular was inspired by, my music is always, for the most part, inspired by at the time, I didn't have the practices that I do now, like basing a song off of something that I appreciate, like a piece of visionary art, for example, is one of the ways that I get inspired. As an example, back then it was really largely me attempting to recreate a feeling that I've had before, or an experience that I've had before, or creating an emotion that I think that I would feel in a certain situation. So to describe it sounds kind of nebulous, but to me, it actually feels like a great target, because I'm very, I grew up fairly sensitive as a kid. And so as often artists are. And for me, it actually felt like a very organic way to aim my creativity at and give myself some type of creative constraint and something to aim for when I was getting the sounds to come out of the speakers. I was also just really discovering psychedelics at the time. And so that album has a very psychedelic quality to it. And those were also some of the experiences that I was looking to recreate, like the feeling that I had and the sense of connectedness with something beyond myself, and the sense of expansion that I experienced, and growth and evolution that I also experienced as a result of my introduction to psychedelics.
And I think that title is so aptly appropriate for the music and what you're going through. I don't know if you want to speak further to the idea of maybe subconscious mind, or like the subs.
Yeah.
The bass, or if however.
Yeah. Well, it was meant to be a double entendre, because I spelled sub and conscious as two separate words to try and point that out. I early on, I was always really into bass before bass music was ever really a thing. I noticed that I really liked music that had a really rich, warm bass sound, and tended more towards bass heavy in general. At least a lot of focus on the bass line. In hindsight, it was sort of like the beginning of me exploring philosophy and my inner verse versus the outer verse, and just what goes on in me, what motivates me to do the things that I do. And I was just starting to realize that how much of me operated from an unconscious or subconscious place. And I was really fascinated by that. And it also spoke to where I was a fairly introverted person. Ironically, it was a way for me to, I think, point to what fascinated me. I spent a lot of time, being in my own head, other than when I was spending time with my friends. And so I think it was also influenced by that. And then just also the psychedelic experience, I think in some ways really helps us to see some of our blind spots that emerge from our subconscious. So I suppose, it's almost hard to think back to all the reasons why I thought that was a good title, but those are the ones I can remember.
For sure. And after that album was released, did you feel the momentum picking up? Were there more connections?
Yeah. That same year, I got my first booking as an artist, as opposed to a DJ. I got booked for Boom Festival in 2004 in Portugal.
Oh, wow.
And I went through, the internet was not at all what it is now. Back then there was, there was so much less connection, so much less information online about what was going on. Like once I finished the album and was waiting for Waveform Records to release it, there were so many questions that I had a hard time figuring out, like, how does this work? Now that I've released an album, once it comes out, can I just quit my day job? Do I not have to work anymore? Am I just going to be on the road? I didn't know. There was so much I didn't know that was curious about. And I did start to get bookings at that time. And I would usually have, I don't know, somewhere between 3 and 10 a year for the first several years. I mean, I didn't have an agent at all back then. And I was definitely not very good at promoting myself. Like, usually if they happened, it was because somebody reached out to me. So it wasn't until 2010 that I got my first agent, who has been my agent for most of my career, Chris Richards. And that's when things really picked up, because then I had somebody to take up a skill in me that was fairly under-resourced and start promoting me and really getting me out there. So I'm really grateful for that. But yeah, it wasn't until 2010 that things really started to pick up. There were a number of circumstances that allowed me to really start to dig in at that time that I'm so grateful for, including the support from some people that I knew and loved at that time, and getting Chris on board so he could promote me. And basically by 2010, I was like, okay, it seems like I'm kind of half in this world. I'm doing some shows, but it's definitely not enough to really support me comfortably. So I'm going to just either give this a solid chance and really dig into it for some undetermined amount of time. And if it didn't work out, then I was just ready to try something else. And it was when I really dug in and got an agent and had the support of in particular, somebody that was really close to me, that things really opened up for me.
That's great.
Yeah.
And so you've discussed a few different turning points that have helped lead you to where you are today. But I wonder if there's any moment that was either internally or externally perceived as a failure, or just something that really sucked, that was just a low moment, and in hindsight actually helped set you up for further success. Like the job could have been one of those, obviously, but maybe something else.
Yeah. One thing that I still, I'll still occasionally, my propensity to question myself and my choices swings back around and looks at, my output has not been as, like, I wouldn't exactly call myself prolific. I'm not like pumping out music all the time. That being said, I really like the music that I put out, and not that it's a dichotomy. I mean, it's definitely not an either or. If I had to choose between putting out a lot of music and liking some of it versus taking time between my releases, but really being proud of the music that I have to offer, and being proud of the fact that most of the time I put an album out, there are many different songs that people really like, as opposed to just like having one song that people like and the rest seem like filler. Mm-hmm. I would choose the way I'm doing it. And the other side of that is that I'm sure that there's a way that I could maintain my quality and my connection and integrity to the creative process, and also be creating more music. I would like to have more music out there than I have. I don't view it as a failure, but I do look back and I think I might have made some different choices around what I was prioritizing through parts of my career, such that I wasn't making as much music as I could have.
In that creative process, how do you know what's going to stick and what's worthwhile pursuing, and what, stems or tracks are just kind of not up to the quality standard that you've set for yourself?
Yeah, it's mostly, there's so many different ways to go about making music. Like some artists, for example, will write. I think, for example, it seems like it's fairly common in the pop music industry, for example, that artists will make way more songs than they're intended to go on the album. And then they basically, through trial and error and lots of A/Bing and stuff, they whittle it down to the songs that are the best and then put it on there, which requires that you have a lot of output, at least more than I have. For me, most of the time that I start a song, I end up finishing it at some point and it goes on a release. that being said, sometimes I'll start a song and then I'll just reach a point where I'm not sure what to do with it, and I'm comfortable just putting it away. Like, for example, the song Flamenco Dub, Spanish Fly, on my first album. I had started that song 3 years earlier, and it wasn't until I had had several songs done for the album that I went back and opened it up. I hadn't heard it in 3 years, that I was like, oh, I know exactly what to do now. I've done a lot of growing and evolving. And so sometimes they get started and don't come out for months or years later, or like a release or two after I started it. But most of the stuff that I start, I end up finishing and end up putting out. So I don't have the challenge of deciding which ones are going to go on the album and which don't, just because of the way that I create.
So what's one of the best investments that you've ever made? It could be time or money, but it could be learning a new skill. It could be the logic, tools, or intricacies of the DAW that you prefer. But what in your mind has been the best investment that you've made?
I have an answer for that question related to music, and I have I have an answer related to music and an answer that is unrelated to music.
Okay, great.
That both equally answer that question.
Cool.
You want both of them?
Yeah, if you're willing to.
Yeah, for music, it's the music industry. There are certainly exceptions to this, but by and large, I mean, like so many industries out there, being an artist is not an easy path. You have to, for a while, it's like swimming upstream, and you have to face you have to be willing to fail your way forward. You know, most people don't come out of the gate deciding they're going to be an artist making amazing art. You know, it happens, but I feel like it's the exception as opposed to the rule. And to me, once I realized that I actually was building enough proficiency and liking what was coming out of the speakers such that, like, oh, wow, I could actually really make an effort here to be an artist or a musician. I got to this place where I couldn't not do it. And it's one of the things that I tell people that are pursuing music, like, you know, look for that moment when you decide that I can't not do it. It just feels like something I need to do. That's a beautiful moment, because then whether things are easeful or hard for you, whether you're getting negative feedback or positive feedback, whether you're trying to figure out how you're going to pay your next check or things are comfortable, like, it's all kind of secondary, because you're now doing something that you're really committed to. And it makes everything, it turns the dial down on whatever else might feel uncomfortable. It did for me anyway. And so it was shifting my focus and sort of like making the internal commitment that I'm going to do this. I'm going to give this a shot, and I'm going to pour everything that I have into it. That is a decision that I made that I feel I'm so grateful for. I mean, I don't know what I would be doing if it wasn't music. And I'm so grateful. I mean, to be able to create something and put it out in the world that other people did when I was growing up, that meant so much to me, that helped me do something as intimate and growth oriented as getting in touch with feelings that I was otherwise suppressing, that I can now do that for other people is, I mean, it's incredibly fulfilling. I'm so grateful. So I'm grateful that I leaned in. There are certain aspects of my personality that don't do that, and I'm not entirely sure why I made that choice with music, given how hard of a path it can be. But I'm really grateful that I did.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and the non-music answer is I'll put it this way: the time and the money that I've invested into my own personal growth, and taking a look at some of the patterns and wounding that I have from childhood and just from life, and blind spots that I have, and getting in touch with those and creating a greater sense of awareness and developing a capacity to be able to witness myself in a moment where I'm speaking from a disempowered or a place of victimhood, and be able to heal some of those things and grow over time. I mean, I'm by no means claiming to be a healed or evolved person. What I am claiming is that I have had and experienced and leaned into a lot of growth, particularly in the last 5 years. And there is nothing else besides music that I have invested my time or money in that has so drastically raised the resting baseline state of my day-to-day experience of life and living. What it's developed in me is this massive curiosity for the human psyche and how people work and what drives them to do what they do, both at a conscious and an unconscious level. Because I've developed a capacity to see myself and understand and interpret what drives me and my motivations. Over time, I now am able to just be talking to somebody, and there's a part of me that is just kind of taking them in, that's less about the actual content that they're saying, that's more about their perspective and how they're framing things the way they are and what words they're choosing to use in their posture. This isn't a conscious thing I'm trying to do. It's just because I'm so fascinated by that, and because I've developed a capacity to do that with myself, I'm really curious about people. And I love the human psyche. Somebody once told me, a good friend that I made a couple of years ago, she said, of course I would call you into my life, you who deconstructs the psyche as a hobby. And I was like, oh, I do that, don't I? She's like, yep. So yeah,
that's awesome.
My own personal growth.
Yeah, just to poke into that a little bit further, is there any topic, I know you mentioned already philosophy and psychology, or course or person that might have influenced you?
It was the inspiration to it's almost a tenet in the personal growth world that in general, people don't usually make the effort to actually change their behavior at a very core level until they reach a level of pain that they're no longer willing to tolerate. And that was what happened. It wasn't so much because I saw other people that I wanted to emulate or try and figure out how I could do more of that. It was through my relationships. I started noticing patterns that were showing up in my relationships over many years that I couldn't not see that I was the person that it was at the center of all of that I was the thing in common. And once I really let that in, I decided to experiment with what would it be like to just take on the perspective that everything that I'm unhappy about in my relationships that I formerly thought was about the other person is actually in some way a manifestation of me, that I'm responsible for that. Just to try that on. And as a result, I started seeing some of the patterns that before were, they were blind spots for me. And then as I started just looking into and reading about how I could go about changing these things, and having a big community of friends that was largely in the personal growth space, that I just threw myself into it. I was doing like multiple modalities at a time. I was doing like PTSD and trauma release work. I was doing holotropic breath work. I was doing neurofeedback therapy. I was doing shaman-led 5-MeO DMT sessions. I was doing a lot of reading. I just threw myself into it, and I've definitely slowed down the pace of it because it was a lot to do all at once. But those were just some of the things that I chose to do as a result of what I was seeing about myself. And the motivation to do it really came from no longer being willing to tolerate what I previously in hindsight realized I was seeing from a place of victimhood about my intimate relationships.
Wow, that's deep.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. And now I'm just going to bring it down to the base level and mention something I saw in an interview. I think it was Jay Leno, and he was talking about driving, and everybody else is the asshole. Some asshole cut you off. Some asshole's going too slow. This asshole doing that. And then he says, like, do you ever stop to think, maybe I'm the asshole? And anyways.
Yeah, it's it's one of the things that I've developed a level of capacity in, is when I find myself experiencing contraction or discomfort or judgment or dissatisfaction about somebody else outside of me, somebody else in my life, close or not. It's started to become fairly reflexive of, aiming that same level of assessment at myself, because on some level, I think that most people, it's hard to recognize a behavior in somebody else unless you either have had or do have that trait in yourself. Otherwise, it would just kind of come and go. You wouldn't even understand it enough to be impacted by it. It would be like somebody coming up to you and saying that your name is Bob when it's something else. It would just be like, okay. So there's a lot of good, I discover a lot of good nuggets around myself as reflected by what I initially observe in somebody else. Sometimes you find that, oh yeah, I actually do that. Or the part, something that upsets me about this person and their behavior could be any number of things. Like sometimes it'll be because they're actually doing something that I would like to be able to do, or a trait that I would like to have. But because I don't, and it scares me, it's easier to actually have judgment about what they're doing than to actually just see, or the impulse can sometimes be to judge rather than just, another option would be like, wow, can you tell me more about that? I'm curious, like that's something that I actually would like to do and I'd like to learn. Can you tell me more about what it's like to do that, or what led you to make that choice? Sometimes in order to get there, you need to first discover that you're the asshole.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate what you're saying. And a buddy of mine mentioned something in a similar note. And it's just like if I am talking with somebody and they're trying to do something and I'm trying to help them. And I'm like, come on, why aren't you taking action? Like, we've already been through this, like, let's get going. But like, really, that's also an aspect of me that I'm not taking action on other things. And I'm, judging somebody else for not kickstarting themselves. And obviously there's something internally as well, which is what's frustrating me. So I do appreciate.
I know very much what that one is like.
So maybe totally off the rails. We'll see where it goes. But what's some of the best or worst advice that you've ever received? You could take either or both, your choice. Well,
it wasn't so much advice, but there's many. One of them is, there was a period in my career where I really put a lot of weight on creating sounds that were leaning in the realm of innovation. And because you can make sounds that you haven't really heard before with a computer, there's almost like this unconscious expectation that artists are often doing that, creating something that hasn't been heard before. I was just spending a lot of time, like I got off on the idea that I was spending a lot of time trying to create a particular sound or to get it to sound really unique. And this was many years ago. I read an interview by Moby, and somebody asked him what he thinks about artists that are really pushing the envelope in terms of sound design. And he said, I'm something along the lines of, I'm grateful for people doing that. It keeps genres moving forward and it births new genres. It's very necessary. And he pointed out that for him, he just strives to make emotional music. Like being innovative in terms of sound design just wasn't his thing. And it got me thinking a lot about ultimately, I mean, there definitely for me is a space. I love making certain sounds really talk to me and certain songs really don't. And sometimes they require time to really sculpt them. It's not that I totally decided to give up being innovative in my sound design, but I realize that ultimately the vast majority of people that take in my music aren't musicians. And ultimately what they do is they're like, this song moves me or it doesn't. Whether you spent a week on a single sound or you pulled up a preset that they've never heard before anyway, or maybe they have, it doesn't, none of that registers. Like they don't see into the rabbit hole that the artists that make this stuff with see into. They're just like, this song makes me move or it makes me feel something or it doesn't, you know? It's not everybody, but to me, that's the vast majority of people. And so it helped me really shift into remembering how I just started putting a lot more weight on the end experience that somebody has when they listen to my music, and not putting so much weight on needing to spend a lot of time in order to feel like the sound or the song is valuable. That being said, it didn't end up really actually speeding up too much the time that it takes me to make a song, but it did really shift where I put my time and attention and what the final result is and what I appreciate about music. So it wasn't exactly advice, but I took it that way anyway, and I'm really grateful for that perspective.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome, and so true. Most people that listen to your music are listeners, and so got to move the audience, not dig into some sound just for the art, the arcane knowledge of compression or whatever it is. So I want to kind of zoom out high level a little bit on your production style and how it's evolved over time. And are you currently using Logic or anything else?
Yeah, for the most of my career, I've used Logic, and I've used Ableton for most of. I mean, for the most part, I produce in Logic, and when I was doing more of a performance-based set where I was muting channels from my song, I had my song stemmed out, and I would mute a channel and then play it on the Launchpad, for example. I was then using Ableton to do that as a performance tool. I now primarily DJ when I do my sets. And I'm trying out Ableton more, just because there are so many tutorials about how to do things, and there's so many courses that offer information that's primarily centered around Ableton, just because it's like the primary DAW that people seem to use. And also just because once you get really familiar with a tool, I like what happens when I try something else out that I'm not as familiar with, because it ends up informing me to make different choices. It doesn't give me as much of an opportunity to fall back on all the unconscious choices that I make with the tool I'm already used to, because they've just become habituated. I have to think about things a little bit more and be in more of an exploration kind of mode. And that tends to elicit sounds and decisions, and ultimately like a song that sometimes sounds a little different than I would have gotten if I had used the same tool. So I'm doing a little bit more of like trying out back and forth. Just for fun. I would still say the Logic is my main DAW, though.
Cool. And just for those technical people out there, or musicians who might be viewing this sometime, do you have any favorite tools or plugins that you are kind of a common go-to?
One answer is, like, in terms of synths, Omnisphere is my favorite synth. It's got, it has, I think at this point, over 8,000 presets, and the hit rate on presets that are usable as a good starting place are so high. It also just has a lot of sounds that are more kind of like cinematic, in as far as like genres of sounds go. And I like sounds a lot. I like music that has somewhat of a cinematic feel to it. And it's diverse. You can do a lot with it. It's also not as popular as like Massive or Serum, which I also use and love. So it's you can the more you use the same synths that everybody else uses, to an extent, it can be, unless you're paying attention, it can be harder to sound unique in some way, at least based on the sounds that you're using, depending on how much time and effort you put into the sound design and things like that. There are a lot of people that use Massive. It's just, I'm sorry, Omnisphere. I just find that it's not common. So I also like that about it. I also, I really like the microphone. It's quite often I'm sampling sounds that are, I'm recording sounds like everything. Like I'll just pick up any random object and I'll hit it on a bunch of things and record the sound. I'll aim the mic out the window to just record the ambient noise. I'll put up the record app on my iPhone and record just random sounds that I come across while I'm out living life. And so often they end up in my music. And to me, because music made with a computer, at least unless you know enough to make some effort to have it sound more organic, it can sound very sterile, and overly quantized and just kind of mechanical. And when you incorporate sounds from the real world, if you want to call that, or maybe it's the Matrix, I feel like it makes the music more relatable, even if only on an unconscious level. Especially if you put the human voice in, and it doesn't need to be lyrics. It doesn't even need to necessarily be recognized as, oh, that's a human voice. But the human voice to me is the universal instrument. I mean, even if you're talking to somebody who speaks a language you don't, there's a lot of information, if you start paying attention to tone and just how they're saying what they're saying, that you can actually get. I mean, we all know what the human voice sounds like. To me, it's sort of like the universal primary sound. It's what we first started hearing when we were born, is the voice of our parents. And so I love finding unique ways to incorporate the human voice and just sounds from the organic world into the computer. So it's, funny enough, like the microphone is a tool that I love using, especially because there's a fair amount of experimentation and unknown. It's one thing to record a sound in a location somewhere, and quite often I don't know how I'm going to use it. I just know that, I'm going to use that somehow. And then you just kind of figure it out. It introduces a level of uncertainty in the music making process that's really fun for me.
So to switch gears a little bit and talk about a few of your tracks that are more recent, just because I want to make sure we talk about your music and not just dig into the production, because you do have a production course, which let's just touch on that real quick. I believe it's called Future Production. Is that correct?
Future Producer.
Close.
Yeah. So it's just, continue the play on starting something with a PH. Those Future Primitive, which is me as an artist, and then Future Producer, which is me as someone who is wanting to help other people learn how to create music. I have futureproducer.com, and the primary course that I offer is called the Future Producer Method. And that one is particularly aimed at people who are just getting started, because in researching, it seemed like people who wanted to start but weren't really sure how to get started seemed to be like one of the most underserved aspects of the market at large in terms of people that want to produce EDM. So that's what that one is aimed for. And probably in the not too distant future, I'll be coming out one that's sort of like a second version of that, that's more for people who already have started and are looking for something deeper. I've also made some templates, like music making templates for Ableton and Logic and things like that. But it feels so good to be able to help other people have the opportunity to onboard what it's like to make music. One of the things that I say is, to me, making music is like creating worlds out of thin air, and I want to help people know what that feels like.
Wow, that's a great phrase. So why is it important to you to help others make music?
Because of how much music has meant for me, how much it has done for me. And because at this point, I've been around it so much. I mean, when I say that music is medicine, I mean, I really wholeheartedly believe that. I mean, I've what feels like countless times now, see people lose themselves on the dance floor, or have a cathartic experience, or connect with people, or connect with themselves, or connect with like this field of a room or a venue or a festival full of people that are all in motion, moving to like this single, invisible, but very visceral thing, and having like in some cases, a profound experience. I mean, there are so many different ways to me that music is a very real medicine and has the power to transform at different levels. And I'm such an advocate for that. And anything that I can do to help people or foster the opportunity for people to have experiences like that. Ultimately, it's up to them and the music and the relationship between those two that's going to determine whether that happens. But anything that I can do to help increase the likelihood that there's an opportunity for that to happen, whether it's through putting out my own music or helping people learn what it's like to create music, it's something that I'm really passionate about.
Awesome. And I think it should be said that you are operating from a place of not like scarcity where it's, oh, I know this and therefore I got to keep it in my back pocket because I can't share it, versus the where you're seemingly coming from it is just a place of sharing, of giving. An idea can be shared and it doesn't take away from the fact that you had it to begin with.
Yeah, when I first started really getting into DJing and finding the artists that made music I really liked, before I had really gotten into making my own music and discovering my own sound, I was really fascinated by how artists have a particular sound. And I had this unconscious presupposition that it was through a lot of effort that one developed their own sound. And it wasn't until I started making my own songs that I realized, oh, what actually is one of the things that informs that is the choices that you make around, for example, the sounds that you choose to make or pick, like it's your curation process for sounds. But then beyond that, it's largely it's all, like I said before, it's all of the choices that you make unconsciously and consciously in the studio over and over again that start to shape a direction for what becomes your sound. It's actually hard not to have a sound. And the other thing to answer your question or just your observation is that it's very clear to me. I mean, there are thousands and thousands of people that produce electronic music, and thousands of artists that just produce, bass music or house or any given thing. I mean, and for the most part, we're all using the same tools. I mean, one, you can give 10 different producers who all produce music in the same genre, like incredibly narrow creative constraints. Like, this is the DAW you're using. You're going to use this one synth, and these are the parameters that you get to make this song in. And you're going to end up with 10 like wildly different songs. Like, so even when you specifically try and give people a set of rules that really restrict what they're going to do, the output is still wildly different. And I'm not worried about somehow somebody taking what I'm doing and doing something that's going to interfere with my growth as an artist. It's not. To me, that feels like a type of scarcity that I don't want to indulge in. And I also just don't feel that it's true. I'd rather be giving people the opportunity to have the experience of doing something in the realm of creation, because to me, creativity is like music. To me, making music is just as much of a potentially healing experience as listening to it can be. And I want people to know what it feels like I said before.
I just realized that we glanced over this, or we totally skipped it, but Phutureprimitive, where did that come from and why did you choose it?
It came from a lot of things. It was, so I like contrast, for example. Contrast fascinates me because to me, when you have one thing, it's easier to me, there's a way in which it's easier to understand and appreciate that one thing if there is something else that you're comparing it to in some way. It gives you a reference point for what this thing is. And in particular, creating a contrast where, for example, there's a sound that might be really lush or soft or beautiful, and combining that with something that's like really distorted or rough or gritty, is really interesting. Like, when you can do that in a palatable way. And so, in that way, the term future primitive is like, it's very, in a compound word, you're creating contrast. I'm also really fascinated by duality, which is sort of similar to contrast, but it's, even at an early age, I noticed how much it seems like it seems like this built-in human tendency to observe things from the standpoint of duality. It's like, if somebody has a perspective, generally, if somebody doesn't agree, they'll tend to take like what feels like almost a reciprocal and equal opposite stance. And then the discussion or argument or disagreement is had from the place of either or. And it feels like, I've had many years to think about this, so I wasn't this articulate about it back then, but there's an entire spectrum of both between those 2 points and beyond that we actually have to explore. Very, very seldom do I feel like are things actually a duality. I think quite often they're false dichotomies. But that being said, I guess it's future primitive is another way to put two things together that feel opposite. To me, the magic is actually in the middle. It's between being future oriented and being past oriented is actually the present moment. And that's kind of like the hidden thing in the name. Is, to me, actually present moment awareness is one of the best places to spend time while we're alive in this version of reality on this planet. And beyond that, there's all kinds of, it wasn't intended to really mean one thing, because there's a way, at least to me, that it's an evocative moniker. And often people will come to me, fans, for example, and they'll say, by future primitive, did you mean this? And I always answer yes, because it wasn't ever meant to be indicative of one thing. The other primary thing that it points to is that by then I had really discovered that my favorite kind of music tends to blend electronic sounds, which you could see as the future side, and organic elements, like I was talking about, the human voice or anything that we experience with our ears in real time in this world. And that could be seen as the primitive. And so it was a way to sort of point to two aspects of music that I really like when they're married together in a creative way. Well said.
Well said. So
thank you.
To be respectful of your time, we're going to zoom forward through a couple albums and touch on a song on a more recent release, Somatica. First of all, it has a really, I would say, gentle intro. And tell me if I'm wrong, but I think it's a hang drum or some sort of hand percussion at the intro.
It has a sound that sounds very much like that. That sound was actually from Omnisphere. And that's an example of what I'm talking about, that it has a lot of sounds that feel like they're a little more organic or orchestral in some way. So yeah, it sounds a lot like that. I don't think that the original source was a hang drum, but it definitely sounds it has a very melodic percussion feel, which a hang drum is.
Nice. And then I do hear some vocal samples, and I assume it's not robotic voice, but...
that was, I don't even remember where they came from at this point. That's also an example of a song that was started 2.5 years, almost 3 years before it ended up being released. It was a collaboration with my best friend and artist. His name, he releases under the name Nimite, which is an acronym for Nothing is More Important Than Anything Else. and he had started a song and just sent it to me as an idea, and I heard all these ways that it could go. So I started adding some things to it and sent it back. Sometimes we were working in the studio together. That's often how my collaborations end up happening, is that you just start sharing ideas back and forth. Really early in my career, I was really precious about things that I would start. I'd want to start it and finish it. And just over time, as I evolved, I realized, God, the more it can be just sort of like a team effort to create something beautiful. You can learn a lot about other choices that people make. You can learn a lot about shortcuts and how to do something more efficiently, or ways of thinking about the creative process that you wouldn't have otherwise discussed when you're just by yourself, or discovered when you're by yourself. And so it got to a point where it was kind of at a demo status, and we would sometimes play it out in our sets, but there were some parts of it that I was never really satisfied with. And then fast forward 2.5 years later, I was working on music for Congruence, that album, and I opened up the project file and I listened to it, and I got so many ideas that came through to me about directions it could go, and that became the version that's now released on Congruence.
Again, with the contrast, at least that's some of the language I would use. You've got this like gentle intro, and then you get, I think they're like 64th or maybe 32nd notes, is, building the tension, and then there's just opening of space. And how do you think through the combination of sounds, the combination of speed or time, and the congruence of it all?
It's interesting because one way that I would explain it is it actually doesn't feel like thinking. It feels like, to me, my favorite moments in the studio is when, you could call it the song or spirit or the universe, or just like when something is telling me what to do. It doesn't feel like I'm arriving at it through a deliberate intent to figure out what the next thing is. It's this interesting kind of like, it's kind of like a feeling of surrender, but it's, I don't know how to describe it other than just that it's like you become kind of like this open channel, and it's sometimes it's almost like, when you're driving a car and you drive several blocks and then you try and think about it and you can't remember anything about how you just drove the last several blocks, but you did, and you made it there just fine. It's a little bit like that. Like sometimes I'll do a series of actions and I'll put a melody in the timeline and I'll drop some samples in or do some sound design, and then I'll just kind of sit back and I'll listen to it. And I feel like I'm as surprised as somebody would be who was sitting next to me that had no idea what I was going for, because I don't always know exactly what it's going to sound like. It's just like all of a sudden you're listening to what you have and this idea just comes through. And the better you get at the production aspect, the more the tasks to get what's in your head to come out of the speakers are just invisible. It just kind of happens. You have an impulse and your fingers and hands start doing the thing on the keyboards and make the sounds come out of the speakers. And so that doesn't always happen. Those are my favorite moments. Sometimes just the channel isn't open, or the ideas aren't getting through. And sometimes I'll tough it out and then I'll more like think or effort my way through the process. Sometimes I'll also just step away and come back hours later or the next day. What I'm listening for is what the song isn't doing yet that I want it to do. And then I make my best effort to make it do the thing that I want it to do, whether it's giving me a feeling or filling this empty spot in the frequency that I feel like would really improve the song if it was filled with something, or add some type of unexpected chord change, or it's just whatever I want to hear the song do next. I have the opportunity to do. I have the opportunity to create that to happen. And that's why it feels like creating worlds out of thin air. It's like, it's, I mean, it's what you're doing. You're creating an experience that someone's going to take in over time. And you have so much influence over what that experience is like based on all the choices that you make. And ultimately, it's about just listening for what I want to have happen in the song. What do I want the song to elicit? Or what do I want to feel more or less of in the song? And then doing that over and over until it feels like it's more or less a complete journey.
How do you think about negative space in context of production?
Yeah, it's very important. First of all, it's there's that saying, music is just as much about the notes as it is about the spaces in between. That's really true. One of the last steps that I actually do when I make my songs are, by the time you finish a song, especially if for people that tend to just start a song and not move on to the next one until it's finished. By the time you're finished, it can be hard to hear it for the first time, like with fresh ears, and like, okay, I feel like I'm finished making the decisions. It's not telling me that it wants anything more. Is it good? And sometimes you can hear it, just listen to it, and you can get that feeling. Sometimes you need to step away from a couple days or a week. Sometimes you need to try it out at a venue or a festival to see how people respond. But one of the last things that I'll do is, as I have all the stems in front of me and I'm listening to it, I'll randomly try taking out sounds. And most of the time, when I thought I was done, when I try taking out a sound, and just whether it's a little supporting sound or a fairly big sound, quite often I like it better. It's because it's reintroducing space that at some point I kind of pushed or efforted past, that at the time that I was making it sounded better. But now that I have the context for the whole journey, actually this journey is served better by maybe removing some parts of that sound or just altogether, which is ultimately creating more space. Because anymore, like, if you have a good computer, there's almost no limit to how many sounds you can put in a song. And it's easy to overdo it because you want to keep, it's easy to be additive. I think there's a real power in being subtractive, which can ultimately help reveal a space in the song that can end up improving the end result.
Oh, I love that strategy. Just go through, and because you don't know which one you should get rid of. Because you intentionally put them all there. So I love that strategy, just going through and muting them individually. And that one's now we're somewhere better. So that's great.
An example of that, that's not me, but I have a friend who's a big Prince fan. And he told me this story that the song Purple Rain by Prince, it actually, if you listen to it, it has no bass line. And when it was produced, it had a bass line, and the last thing that he did before he printed the song and sent it off to be mastered and released was he decided to just mute the bass line. And he's like, they're not going to believe this, because almost all songs have bass lines if you think about it. But it never occurred to me, all the times I've heard that song, that it didn't have a bass line until somebody pointed out that it didn't, which means it was plenty fine without it, which means it gave the song more space and room to breathe. And I guess that's another example of somebody else that chose to remove something in order to improve.
Yeah, that's great. And when you are sitting down, blank slate, open Logic project, nothing on there, is there a typical starting point that you work with?
It's at times in my career, I usually started with the drums because that was the thing that I first felt proficient at producing. So I'd probably say like the first half of my career, I generally started with the drums, and then just the song came from there. Now there's not really a typical way that I start. It can be it can be a vocal sample, for example, that I get either from a vocalist that is sending me a recording or a sample. It could be a chord progression that I either have hummed into my phone at some point in the past or hear in my head. It could be just a sample of a sound. It could be a top melody. It actually, now that I've gotten in the habit of not having one specific way that I start, I actually like the creative process even more because it's a way for me to add an element of uncertainty in the creative process. And I feel like I get more variation out of what I produce when the way that I started is a little different each time. There are a lot of people that get a lot of benefit out of having templates and sort of like specific ways that they go about being more efficient in the studio. And there's a lot to be said for being more efficient. And as long as I've been making music, I've tried that, and I feel like it leans towards having things feel more samey in some way, even though I'm aiming to make a different song each time. And when I just sit down with a fresh template that has absolutely nothing in it, and I'm starting with whatever feels emergent at the moment, I like what I come up with even more. The other thing that often informs a song is often not a sound at all, but is one of the things that I teach in my course as a way to find inspiration is use, like an example that I often give is the song Boundless on my Flow EP came from me making a soundtrack for a piece of visionary art that I have by Hans Voller called Cielo Cielo. And I love that piece. And I was looking at it one day and I asked myself the question, if that piece of art was a song or had a soundtrack, what would that song be? And every time I had to make a choice or come up with something new, I would just look at that piece and take it in. So like in this case, there's a female voice that represents the woman in that piece of art. There's this growl that happens intermittently in the song that represents the lion that's in that piece. There's an arpeggio in that song that to me represents this hummingbird that's in that piece. And just the song came out of me so fast because it gave me a creative constraint or like a directionality for my decisions that really works. So I've since then used that a lot. For me, for some reason, often having something visual as an inspiration for what I'm creating tends to elicit, or when I made music for Samskara by Andrew Jones, that was the writing process was really enjoyable because I always had something to inform the choices that I was making about the music.
And so I've experienced that. I don't think that there's another word for that piece of work, Samskara.
Yeah.
And was it visually constructed when you started on the audio?
Yes. Yeah, it was okay. Visually, it was, there were a couple parts that had nothing in it, but they were very brief. It was like 90 or 95% finished. So, yeah, which it was partly used from the first version that they had. And when I was essentially making a soundtrack for what was sort of like the second iteration of it, there were new parts that had been added to what was in the first version, as far as I understand it. And so I was just getting to make like a fresh soundtrack, other than there was one song that I had pre-released that was actually from Subconscious that ended up on that soundtrack, and the rest were all original pieces.
Yeah, well, that's a beautiful piece of art.
Thank
really,
you.
Really profound. Yeah, I can't say enough. So if anybody out there is listening and you have a chance to see it at some sort of what are those domes called?
Yeah, like a geodesic dome.
Yeah, or
yeah.
Projection.
Like a planetarium?
Planetarium, that's where it was.
Yeah,
yep.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Whew. I'm glad that one came out. I want to talk about another song of yours on congruence, and that's Vaporized into Dust on a Faint Breeze. First of all, what was the inspiration behind it?
Well, as I said, part of my personal growth journey that I've been on for several years now, part of that, one of the things that I explored in order to reveal parts of myself to myself was the medicinal use of 5-MeO DMT. And it's referred to as the grandfather of psychedelics for a reason. I mean, it's there's no way to not know that you are that you are on that ride when it's happening. And it's long story short, that song was, again, me using an experience that I had over and over and attempting to recreate some of, I mean, the experience feels infinite when you have it. And so it feels almost like a drop in the ocean, but it was my attempt to even nod to what some of the experiences I had like with 5-MeO DMT and not only the experience of actually when in the moment you are on the medicine, but also the experience of like expansion and connection that were left over as the residue of that experience, and the integration that I leaned into after the experience. That was, I mean, even the title, Vaporized into Dust on a Faint Breeze, is like a sort of a poetic expression of how you actually ingest the medicine, which is vaporized. It is one of the single, in the realm of personal growth, it's one of the single biggest levers that in hindsight that I pulled that have had a real big experience on my capacity to witness myself in a moment of, like I said before, disempowerment or pain or fear. And the more that I've found that I can witness myself in those moments, the more opportunity that I have to have influence and bring myself back potentially to a place of being more centered or grounded, or remembering that there is a lot more opportunity or choice in this moment than I'm seeing through my limited, fear-based or wounded self that's currently present. And so that song was me creating a soundtrack for some of those experiences, essentially.
And why did you feel it was important to share it? Because obviously it's an internal experience.
Yeah. Well, for the most part, like, my music has, like I said before, it's usually an expression to represent an emotion or experience that I've had, which usually on some level is an internal one, and turn it into something external in a poetic or creative way that other people can experience. I mean, it's there's a movie with Gary Oldman that's been around for many years now, but called Immortal Beloved. And one of my many favorite moments from that film is where he's asking somebody what is so powerful about music. And he finally tells them, he said, it's the power of the composer to be able to create the opportunity for them to experience something on some level that you have experienced. I mean, even if they don't end up with a direct similar interpretation or intention that you had, you're still eliciting some kind of experience. And that in and of itself is, I mean, that's what art is. It's essentially an attempt to evoke some kind of response. And in general, I feel like it's often most easily and effectively done when, on some level, it's an attempt to recreate or elicit an experience that's organic, that comes from us, because we humans most easily understand and interpret things that happen by other humans. And we all know what it's like to have an internal world or landscape, and to be able to take an emotion and package it and put it into the form of a song is again, it's exhilarating for me. It's one of the best words that I can think of. It's fulfilling. It's satisfying. I mean, it's when I've had that experience because of other people doing that, it can be, I mean, music is music to me is kind of like our photo albums that we have on our phones. I mean, like, there are certain songs that I'll hear that so quickly bring me back to a moment in my life, or bring back the feelings that I had at a peak moment when I was listening to a song, or helps get me in touch with a feeling, or helps me dream into possibilities. I mean, it's for something that we don't actually see in this world. It's incredibly powerful, especially when you consider that it's just it's vibration. It's vibrating air that happens to be organized into a particular fashion that we perceive as not only palpable, I'm trying to think of what the word is, but palatable and interesting to us. And it feels kind of like magic to me.
To touch on the most recent release that you've done, and that is Living Wisdom Part 1. And I believe is that Richard Rudd? Mm-hmm. So if for the listener out there who might not know, I'll try and preface it by saying that you put the music to it, and there's lyrics, but it's spoken lyrics.
You know what the foundation of creativity really is? To be unafraid of making mistakes. Because to be original, you must stretch out your limbs into deep space and take an untrodden path. Wanderer, you make the path by walking. And this is the meaning of this beautiful word, freshness. To be original, to be a pioneer, to be a fool. And it all begins here with the fool. The step that no one else has ever taken. And you know where that step leads you? Out of the numbness, out of the stasis, out of the void and into life. Even if it's a disaster, even if your attempt at novelty or success crashes and burns in a spectacular way, you've made it out of your box. And what a feeling that is. You've begun to live.
It almost seems cinematic. It seems like like when you listen to the instrumentals, you could close your eyes and envision something totally different. And it's I just want to understand, why did you decide to take on that project?
Yeah. So the Gene Keys originally started as a book, which is, it's essentially a series of, you could think of the 64 different gene keys as like 64 different archetypes that ultimately all of them exist inside us. Some tend to be stronger in us than others. And so it's an opportunity to explore these different archetypes and how they play out in our lives. And they're explored from the vantage point of creating a curiosity around how they exist in ourselves, and how we can sort of, in this case, move from how they exist in us to like a shadow state into something that is more everything from pleasant to generative to expansive, and just that ultimately elicit things in us as people that I would imagine most of us want to see more of on this planet. And when I discovered them, it had as far as books go, it had and still has a pretty big impact on me in terms of, it helps me understand myself and others more. And anything that can do that, I'm often interested in. And so I was initially just taking in the book, and then I had discovered there's a friend of mine and great musician. His name is Entheo. Well, his artist name is Entheo. His name is Theo, in Portland, Oregon. We had already met and been friends, but at some level I discovered a project he had started where he was taking some audio recordings of Richard and making music to them. And I was really moved by them. And so I reached out and let him know that I was coming to town because I had a show in Portland where I used to live, and B, that I was really moved by what he was doing. And the timing was amazing. We had just sat down at the dinner table at a restaurant, and he says, "I can't believe you're saying this to me," because he and the community that he is in happens to already have a relationship with Richard. And he had just had a conversation, and Richard said, "I like what you're doing. And I actually, if you're good with it, I want you to do all 64 gene keys, and I want it to be an official part of the brand." And Theo was like, "I want to do that, but I would much rather do it with you so that we can collaborate on this together." And my jaw dropped open. I was like, wait, I get to help you with this and collaborate on this project, that sounds absolutely incredible. So that's how it was born. And we're now, the project is moving a little bit slower than we would both like, because we both have a lot going on, but it definitely is in process, and we're releasing 4 Gene Keys at a time per volume. And it's really fun. It's a nice discipline as an artist to express myself in that way, where I'm making music that is very much intended to be emotive, but also not ever be bigger than his spoken word, which is meant to be the centerpiece. It's like every moment of these songs is meant to essentially support and augment what he's saying. And then before we released it, we realized, well, wait, these are so good, they also stand on their own. So then we decided to release them also just as instrumentals, so people can use them just as songs, or to do medicine ceremonies to, or meditation, or whatever they might want to do with them. And I'm so grateful to be a part of that project.
Yeah, well, it's totally different than any of your other work, from my perspective, in the sense that it's just it. And by the way, it is Richard's voice. Is that right?
Yes, it is.
Okay. It's totally unlike anything else that you'd produced, and it's impressive that you can reinvent yourself in a way to complement this project and work with others, and not try, as you said, to complement, but not hinder the message. So that's. Anyways, it's a really awesome piece of work, and I'm grateful that you put it out there. And I didn't know about Richard Rudd until talking with you, and I got his book, but it's 35 hours or something, so not there yet. But
it's a big one.
Yeah, but you're making it digestible in these smaller.
Yes.
chunks.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I really like. Is I feel like it has the potential to spread the wisdom that is in these teachings to more people, to at least those who resonate with it. I know it did for me. And it's when you make electronic dance music at large for long enough, it becomes a challenge, at least it has for me, to not on some level want to make music that has an impact on the dance floor, because that becomes the primary context that you're connecting with people. And so it's actually really fun to be involved in a project that is not at all aimed towards creating this like visceral kinetic energy on a dance floor in the traditional way we're all used to experiencing it. It's more meant to be kind of like a musical, philosophical exploration that is really about the journey and supporting a message that already exists. It feels really good to have a different outlet for this skill that I've been building over time.
And how many volumes is the total? Is it going to be 64?
Well, yeah, we've released volume 1, which is Gene Keys 1 through 4. And gotcha. Since there's 64 keys, that means there's going to be 16 volumes. And we're doing 4 at a time. We actually already have like another 8 of them finished. But when we started, we were just picking them at random and making them. And then before we realized, well, wait, let's actually just, it would be kind of weird to just release them in volumes of just random collections together. So we just decided to start with 1 and just do it in a linear fashion. So we still have a lot to do, but we still have at least another 8 that are already finished that will get released once we get to whatever volume they belong in, just doing them sequentially.
Just for anybody listening out there, or is there anything that you would like to plug, or just anything that you'd like to share?
Yeah, once I really started having the perspective that music is medicine, it gave me the opportunity to listen to music, whether it's at a music venue or at home in my studio or on a pair of headphones. I mean, there's still plenty of times that I just listen to music in a passive way. I also now have the opportunity to like explore different ways that I can use it as medicine, whether it's to put it on and have it support like my experience of meditation, or to use it in some type of medicine ceremony, or to use it as a backdrop for contemplation. Sometimes I'll do what I call them music baths, where, because it's so easy in this day and age to put on music and have it be more like wallpaper, where it's something that's supportive, another experience that's already happening, is I just sit down, get comfortable, and put on music just to sit and listen to it, not to take my mind somewhere other than just wherever the music takes me. And quite often, just that in and of itself is even a really rewarding experience. So I guess it might be to explore different ways that music might be medicine for you. When I did the Dance Out Your Demons tour several years ago, it was really fun. It was just a way to kind of gamify intention setting. It can be so easy to just go out to a music venue with your friends and get hammered, whether it's on a substance or alcohol or even just the music. And that's absolutely great. And it can also be really powerful to have some type of intention that you bring, because when you're moving your body, you're creating a lot of energy. And I find that when you actually bring some intention to that energy that you're creating, it can actually steer your life in the direction that you want it to go. And in that tour, I had before my set went on, I'd have everybody go to the merch booth, tear off a piece of red duct tape, and with a Sharpie, write down in a single word or a phrase something that they no longer want in their life, that I would phrase as a demon, so to speak. And what ended up evolving in that over time is people would write on one piece of tape something they didn't want in their life anymore, and then on another piece of tape they'd write down something they wanted to bring into their life, and then they'd put one piece on the bottom of each shoe and then go dance out your demons. And so it was a way to give to gamify intention setting. And I think that amazing things can happen when you bring intentionality to the experience that music provides. And I'm grateful to have that perspective. And so I suppose the message that I would leave is for people to consider how music might be lives in their ways for them.
And if somebody were looking to get in touch with you or find more of your work, keep up to date with everything, you already mentioned your course, but let's go ahead and say that link again.
Oh, yeah. So as an artist, you can find me at Phutureprimitive.com, spelled with a PH. And then if you're interested in learning how to produce music or just checking out what I have to offer, that's Phutureproducer.com, also spelled with a PH. And then you can find my music just all the places you'd find music anymore these days. And I wanted to thank you for inviting me to be on the show. Especially after just being quarantined for the last year, it's really good to be emerging and shows starting to happen again. And I very intentionally, once COVID happened, took some time off, just stepped away from the creative process a while, because I've been doing it pretty nonstop for the last 10 years. And it felt really good to take a break. And now that I've had that break, it feels good to be stepping back into it. So thanks for having me on. Yeah.
Well, thank you for being here and being an open book and sharing your music, sharing your wisdom, your course, all of it. I'm very grateful for you. So thank you.
Yeah, you got it. Thank you, Michael.
Listening to the Freio Music Podcast with Michael Morahan. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss a single episode. And don't forget to share this podcast everywhere. Thanks for listening, and until next time, stay tuned.
Freio Music. You are listening to Freio Music.